Thank you for joining me for a special edition of Straight Out of Politics this morning, 11 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 a.m. over where I'm at on the West Coast. Now, today's episode or today's special episode is, I think this is episode 2 or 3 in a series of episodes I'm doing around the broader topic of trauma or the traumatic effects of oppression. And I always give the little short story of why why I'm doing this series and why this ideal came about. So recently I had a cousin who was murdered, doing anything, just at a gas station, he was murdered. So when this happened, what instantly I thought of was, how is this going to affect his kids? What are going to be the lifelong effects on his kids? So that's what kind of flipped my politics to a different perspective of looking at it from the effects of what we're choosing to do. So whatever economic things we're choosing to do, whatever foreign policy things we're choosing to do, and what are the effects of those decisions on kids in particular. So that is where, the framework or where the foundation of where the conversation is coming from. And today I'm bringing on a very, very special guest. We've known each other on Twitter. I'm not sure it's been a year. Maybe it's coming up on a year, but we've been following each other on Twitter for a while. And I don't know what sparked the conversation, but actually, let me bring him in. His name is Professor Anthony Zunkus, and let me make sure I said that right. How are you doing this morning, sir?
The last name is Zankus.
Zankus, thank you.
I answer to a lot of things, so that's fine. And I could just call you Jay, right?
Yes, Jay is absolutely fine. So I was just telling my audience the story of how this kind of came about, where we were going to have this discussion. Right. And I don't remember if it was a tweet or something, but I knew something got us to DM each other, and it was eye-opening that I found out what type of work you were involved in, because it was something that was very, very new to me, that I was trying to forge ahead on this topic of trauma. And so yeah, I was just telling the audience that. But what I wanted to do first is kind of just tell me about yourself. Tell me about yourself professionally. What brought you to this type of work? Any sort of credentials you want to give? Any sort of training that you have in the work that that we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. And I will say, though, Jay, that probably what brought us together on Twitter was the fact that you were constantly bringing the fire. Like, I am a huge fan. You speak truth unfiltered, and you connect with people in a beautiful way. So it's not just about politics and policy. So yeah, I was a fan from the beginning. As soon as I started seeing your account, friends of mine would share tweets that you made, and I would jump on it and be like, wow, this guy is just, like I said, bringing the fire. So and then I know we connected through DMs and the like, credentials. I think it's interesting to me, because on the one hand, I mean, I respect people's hard work, but when we're talking about these issues, the only credential you need is to really be a human being alive on this planet and living in this society. I could talk a little bit about my background. I'm a social worker, and I worked for years in community social work. So I worked with youth and family services. I worked for many years in substance abuse, but a lot of the people I worked with were victims of certain types of either family abuse or relationship abuse, sexual violence, things like that. And then for more than half my career, I've been working in the field of victim services. So that would be victims of child abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence, all the things that that can affect an individual on that interpersonal level, and even community violence. And the common thread was trauma, because whether you were beat up by a gang or the police, which is also a gang, or you were sexually assaulted in your community or your home, the result was this trauma. So, my background came from that, and I learned trauma. My credentials on trauma originally came from the people that I worked with, the people I served, the stories that I heard of children and adults whose lives have been profoundly affected by having been abused and traumatized by another person or by a system or by a group of people. And so, yeah, I teach. Right. So, I was social worker, direct service for many years. I was a director at 2 rape crisis centers in New York. And those also were centers that dealt with domestic violence, child abuse, and human trafficking. So that's my background in victim services. And again, that common thread of trauma. And right now I teach in New York. I am I guess I'm going into my 4th or 5th year at Columbia University in the School of Social Work as a professor. And also now I've been at Adelphi University on Long Island for about, I think I'm going into my 13th year there, somewhere around that. 13th year. Wow, time flies. And I love teaching, but I also do a lot of teaching of community and teaching of professionals. So I am not, most people who don't like to stand in front of a big group and give a speech, I enjoy that. But and the reason I do is I'm passionate about what I'm talking about. So, one thing is, how did I go from talking about, the trauma of sexual violence to the trauma of growing up in a neighborhood with that's being over policed, or a neighborhood with community violence or poverty or high levels of unemployment? The research started showing, and especially in the past 10 years, that the same problems that kids have growing up with things like sexual abuse and physical violence are the same problems that kids growing up as victims of racism, oppression, classism are also dealing with. The results are the same on the brain and the developing bodies especially of children. So it interested me, and I felt, coming from a place of privilege, that I am obligated to say something, because I have this knowledge, and it is incumbent upon me to speak up. And I tell my students all the time, the only acceptable purpose of privilege today is to dismantle privilege, to use it to dismantle privilege and supremacy. And I believe that that's an obligation.
Let me just ask you a question, a follow-up on that, because to me that's kind of it's jarring in the sense that I'm not sure enough people with privilege understand what you just said. So can you speak to that before we kind of, move on? Like you're saying maybe the only acceptable use of privilege right now is to dismantle it.
Yeah.
Do you think people believe that who have privilege?
I think they're not there yet. I think the problem is a lot of white people aren't in the place where they believe they have privilege, right? So we have to get them there. And that's one of the things, is I stand up there in front of a class or in front of a group of a few hundred professionals that I'm training. And I'm like, hey, I am a cisgendered hetero white guy from New York, middle class, employed, and I have a ton of privilege that I was born with, didn't deserve, and did not earn. And what does that mean? Well, I've got male privilege, right? I've got all of this. I've got white privilege. And I like to say that privilege is a little bit like bad breath. You don't know you have it until somebody points it out. So somebody's got to be like, "Ooh, your privilege is showing."
Do you think the terminology, because when you say somebody's disadvantaged, that's essentially saying the same thing. You're just using the word for the opposite, for the other side. So it seems like privileged people never had an issue with calling people disadvantaged, but now that the use of the word privilege is more prevalent, it seems like,
I don't like it,
because it has a connotation of, I got things handed to me, and white America is not there yet, White
Right.
America is not there
They're
to say
not.
I got things handed to me. It's more acceptable to say you were disadvantaged. I was just regular, but
Right.
you were disadvantaged.
Well, white people grow up thinking they're regular all the time and they're normal. I'm normal. I'm regular. What's normal? Normal's a cycle in a washing machine. Normal's not a person. I think we got to look at history. That's one of the things I love about Fred Hampton leftists is you are always bringing up the history and getting people to understand the context that we came from. So, here's an example, like white people are more likely in the United States to be homeowners. So if you just look at that from a position of privilege, you'll say, well, they work hard. They work harder and they, so therefore they get the fruits of their labors. But if you look back not too long in history with the GI Bill, it was actually put into law that they were giving, veterans who were white got that mortgage help, those free houses to start out with, right? Well, the free mortgages to start out with, and black GIs didn't. So that was put into law. That was systemic racism designed to separate the white working class from the black working class. So therefore, generationally, if your grandparents didn't own a home, if your parents didn't own a home, you're less likely to own a home. So yeah, white people are more likely to own a home because the government programs were set up to make sure that was the case. So this is the kind of thing and another thing is, my students will say, hey, I'm white and I grew up poor. Are you saying that my suffering doesn't count? I said, absolutely no, it does count. But you didn't grow up poor because you were white. And that's the difference. And I like to talk about it like even with male privilege. Like I can walk across a parking lot at night as a man. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I'm worried about is, am I going to be able to find my car? Because right. I often don't remember to look where I parked, right? So then I'm like, beep, 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 trying to find it. And what I don't have to worry about is being attacked. And mm-hmm. sexually violated. Women have to worry about that stuff.
Men don't look at that as privilege. That's the thing. It's not enough men look at that as a privilege. They look at that in the same way that I guess white America looks at privilege. It's like, no, masculinity is just normal. You're just feminine. That's the problem. You get what I'm saying? Like this. So it's the same sort of way you look at it.
Hey, I'm trying to think. Is it Peggy McIntosh? Did I say? I don't know if that's her name. I think that may be her name. But your viewers can look it up. It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. I call it a backpack, but Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And what it does is it helps people in positions of privilege to look at their privilege. But that's the importance of intersectionality. Mm-hmm. You can be black in America and have some privilege. For instance, you might be a black American that has a lot of money and maybe money's been in your family for a while. That's true. That happens there, of course. Right. So you've got some of that privilege, but then there's the other side of it, which is you don't have the white skin privilege, and a good example of that is I've been very active with the Black Lives Matter marches since I think 2014 in New York City, some on Long Island. And I always knew that my white skin gave me a pass. It's not right that it does. But in other words, when the NYPD gets a little dicey and they start attacking the march, which they do pretty often, if I just step to the side onto the sidewalk, I'm fine. Because now I'm just a white person walking down the street, right? That privilege, it pervades everything we do. I have a friend of mine, and we talked about this. He's very successful in the entertainment industry. And we were talking about how many opportunities were we given in our lives because we are white and we are male. And no one ever says, hey, you're a white male, come on in, you get the job. Like, it's never said, but it happens a lot. And that's, again, with that privilege, I think, comes the responsibility to call it out. But you can't say, I mean, it's not sour grapes, man. I benefited from it. I'm white. And I'm telling you, it's poison. It's toxic. It's hurting our society.
Do you think it's hard when it's so intertwined into society? You get what I'm saying? Like it's so intertwined that you don't even see. like the person with privilege don't see it that way. They literally think they are just individually better. You get what I'm saying?
Right. Or
So go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go.
No, that was the point. Like,
Why would you need
like
to
how do you what I'm basically, I guess what I'm getting at is I'm trying to understand how to help somebody who
Right.
has that understanding gap about privilege understand.
I was that person. I didn't understand privilege. I didn't understand male privilege. I didn't understand white privilege. I thought, hey, I'm not racist. Therefore, because that's my perspective, I like all people. I'm okay. And then what you have to do, and I would encourage, my white friends out there, listen. Listen to people's experience. I started as a social worker hearing stories, and although my clients who were black or brown and my clients who are white may have had similar issues, drug addiction, that's the field I worked in for a long time, or being victims of abuse or violence, you heard other things when the stories of the black and brown people were told by them. And that it had a lot to do with the way they saw themselves, had a lot to do with the way the world sees them, whereas white people don't think about that. You look at a kid who's 7 years old and they're black, they know they're black. White kids who are 7, 8 don't identify as white, right? Because to them, it's not an identity. It's just the way the world is. Right. So,
it's like you are the template and everybody else is just,
yes.
You know what I mean? Like you're the logo of a human. You're the status quo, I guess, or I don't know if I'm using the right word, but you're right. You get what I mean? Like it's a belief in, it's the use of language. For example, let me give you an example. It's when on news, it's, the suspect is American, 32 years old. When it's no race that's mentioned, that means he's white.
Right.
So you get what I mean? So that means that is the normal. This is the starting point here.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? So that's hard to break that when that's your understanding of existence.
And I think capitalism comes into play here. And this, I know we're going to spend some time talking about it, because if we lived in a society based on mutuality, respect, and dignity for all, where everybody had what they needed and could excel to their greatest capacities, right? That's really the world we should be living in.
Right.
Would working class white people, and I'm not making an excuse for racism, but I'm trying to understand how we fight it and where it came from. Would working class white people need to scapegoat someone else if they had what they need? So what did Trump do? Trump can't, well, he did, they're studying him for quite a while, but what he did was he took that insecurity that working class white America has, and he said, there's your problem there. It's that caravan of people coming over the border from Mexico, and there are thousands of them, and they're coming for your jobs. And it's like, if you just think that through, that's not what's happening. But he could scare people.
Right.
Instead of saying the really rich people who own the corporations are destroying the working class in the United States. They're destroyed. They've already basically done a good job at destroying most of the union movement. We've been shipping your jobs overseas for decades, because 5,000 people in a caravan, which originated in Guatemala or Honduras, which is coming up through Mexico, are not going to take your job. All right? They're not. But the recipe for economic insecurity is already there. People are afraid. And when people are scared, and they don't have the mental bandwidth to sit and listen to Fred Hampton leftists or to be able to read, they're tired at the end of the day. They're taking 3 buses back and forth to work. They're lucky enough to have a job. They're going to listen to the Trump that comes in and goes, blame that person. And
That's the
that's what he did.
politics of racial resentment is what you're describing. And I learned that from Alex Vitale. I just interviewed him last week.
Oh,
That's the politics of racial
right.
resentment. It's taking social economical problems from laws, from policy, and not blaming that and saying it's these people over here. And it could be, whatever. And it's in black and brown people are used a lot to do that. And yeah, he called that as politics of racial resentment. So it's very to see the intersectionality and how you're describing what he's saying. And that conversation was completely about something different. Like that was about police brutality. That was about police killings. And it's an intersectionality here.
And that's the overlap.
Yeah.
And by the way, Alex is awesome. Actually, his wife is a professor at Adelphi.
Wow! So you you've known him or know of him or have met him?
Well, yeah. In fact, the social work department last spring brought Alex Vitale in to do what was all on Zoom because of the pandemic. Yeah. To do a presentation about his work with and if you haven't read the book, The End of Policing,
yes,
people, please pick it up. This man knows more about the history of policing and where we need to go forward than anybody I know. So or than many people I know. But yeah, that intersectionality is important because what I'm excited to be a part of is being one of the people out there that's helping to connect the dots. Because if we just look at individual issues, we don't look at the system. If we look at racism, right, it's a terrible thing. It's a scourge. It destroys lives and communities, right? We know that. Racism as a solitary thing, or sexism, or anti-LGBTQ bias, or what people call homelessness, which I call, the unhoused crisis, right? Look at all of those things, people without healthcare, as individual issues. Then you don't have to look at what connects them together. So, and I think it's important to understand, if we're going to talk about racism and blackness and not have the conversation about what is whiteness, we're never going to get anywhere. So let's talk about what whiteness is. What was the invention of whiteness?
Yeah, but it's an avoidance, and we also talked about this. It's an avoidance of. It's essentially white America does not want their kids to admit to their kids what they've done. So that is a real problem. That is a real barrier. So it's a lot of sugarcoating. It's a lot of not telling the whole story, for example, of slavery. But we're going to go off into a tangent. I do want to get into part of one of the first questions. And first, let me play this video. We are going to circle back to that part, but I want to make sure we cover this part first before we get to that. And let me play this video that I found, I found of your TED Talk, and it's a certain section, and I kind of want to play it and then talk about it on the other side. Let me cue it up here. So let me put it on, and we'll talk about it on the other side here. Let's go.
National Institutes of Health conducted a study where they compared the brains of rich kids with the brains of poor kids, and what they found was astounding. The brains of poor kids had been damaged to the extent that they resembled that of adult stroke victims. And the part of their brains that were impacted the most was the prefrontal cortex, and that's responsible for advanced thinking, judgment, and impulse control, and it's involved in the storage and the retrieval of memories. So science was showing us that the link between low socioeconomic status and poor academic achievement had absolutely nothing to do with a lack of motivation in these kids. It had to do with the fact that their brains have been profoundly impacted by poverty and inequality.
Yeah, so that's essentially sort of describe what I want, what this whole series on trauma and the oppression. It's like, what are the effects of these things that we're choosing to do? So that clip right there, you kind of give a summation of it. Can you kind of, go a little bit more in detail about that particular point that you made there?
Sure. and so here's the way our bodies and brains get damaged by trauma. Okay, we have a stress response system. It is designed to keep us alive. Everybody knows it. It's the fight or flight response. And that's where your heart starts to pound. Okay. So if you're getting chased by what you think may be a vicious dog, all of a sudden your blood starts pumping, your blood pressure goes up, your heart's pounding, all the blood is pushed to your limbs so you could either run or fight, but you're probably not going to be able to fight off that vicious dog so easily. So you're going to want to run and jump somewhere and hide somewhere and get out of the way, right? So the fight or flight syndrome also comes in when you're really, really hungry and your body is calorie deprived, right? So it's a signal to our brain, hey, danger's happening, go get some food. Up goes the heart rate, get ready, and you got to do some work. That system drenches the brain and the body with these chemicals that allow us to fight or flee, to get to a place where we're safe and that, we could replenish. It's kept us alive, and it works very similarly in every mammal, but it's kept us alive as humans for over 200,000 years since we've been a species, right? Because we were not predators. Remember, we were prey. We didn't have big fangs or claws. So, if a mountain lion came after us, we had to use our cleverness and be part of a group to protect ourselves. So that fight or flight response is really about us getting away. Now, here's the thing with humans. So, like, if an animal like a zebra or a deer is being chased by a predator, their fight or flight goes off. But once they're out of danger, it all goes back to normal. You'll even see like a zebra in these like Discovery Channel things shaking off those chemicals, because the chemicals, it's like adrenaline gets you going. So here's what happens. Human beings can be put into that state just by our thoughts. So it's a blessing and a curse to have a developed brain. You could be worried about your bills and your heart rate starts to go up and your blood pressure starts to go up. You could be worried about getting evicted. You might have a loved one, and we know that poor Americans and Black Americans lost far more family members to COVID, right? You may have a family member who's ill, and you're worried that they're going to not make it. Your blood pressure and heart rate go up. So your brain, even though you're not being chased by a wild bear, your brain is responding as if you are. And here's the problem. These stress responses were made to go up every now and then. Flood the brain and the body with these chemicals, get you to a place of safety and you're out of danger and everything goes back to normal and you go about your business. Here's the problem with poverty. Here's the problem with racism. Here's the problem with living Black in an overly policed community. That stress response is going up 15, 20 times a day or more. You've got little kids living in neighborhoods where they're lying awake hearing gunshots at 2 a.m. and can't go to sleep. Their stress responses are going up and they're staying up. And the problem is this. Cortisol is one of those chemicals, right? Those stress chemicals. Cortisol levels that go up and stay up for like days or months or years can actually be toxic to the developing brain. They can affect the way the part of the brain that responds to language grows, or the part of the brain involved with memory. So what I talked about, and in the beginning of that TED Talk, and for those that want to see the whole talk, it's called Watch the Gap. You can just put in my last name, Zankus, and Watch the Gap on YouTube, and it pops up. And the whole thing is like 15 minutes long, right? It's a TED Talk, it's not long. What happens is the part of the brain most likely to be affected by this stress is the front of our brains, and that's what makes us human. That's the part that's involved in learning, in regulating your behavior, sitting still in a classroom and listening to the teacher, or participating in a group with your classmates, or the part that responds when a police officer asks you a question, right? If you're calm, you know what to do. But if you're in a state of stress, fight or flight, your responses aren't going to make sense to the outside world, and it's going to be hard to remember things. these, and literally, so we know this, the social environment can actually change the way our brains and bodies grow because we respond to the environment, and even change the way our genes are expressed. That's how we are, that's how our bodies are set up to respond to the environment. And if your environment is calm and safe and loving and compassionate, you can grow up to your greatest capacity. But if your environment is violent, fear-inducing, threat-filled, you're going to be in that state of stress all the time.
When you say that, what really jumps to my mind are the Palestinian kids. Like, so
Yeah.
this issue is an issue that sometimes gets me emotional. So
Yeah. It's okay. We have to feel. Your humanity is so beautiful, Jay. And I'm sorry you're hurting. I worry about the people that don't have the response, that can't feel the pain. We talk about Palestine. I've watched the footage of those children being interviewed, and it is heartbreaking.
So yeah. But this is why, to me, it's important to do this episode or this series, because
Yeah.
all right, so I think I'm good. It's hard for me because yeah, I'm not going to be able to talk about that.
You know? You know,
Go ahead.
just the thing that worries me most is people who don't allow themselves to feel as deeply as you feel when they hear or see the things that are happening, for instance, in Palestine or in Yemen, and who just kind of back off, shut it out completely, and aren't able to feel. Remember Che Guevara had said, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, I think that the true revolutionary must, at their foundation, be motivated by one thing, and that is love. And if we don't have that, why are we even doing what we're doing? And you obviously have that love for people, because having that love puts us in a position where we're willing to risk feeling their pain and witnessing their pain. And that's not easy work.
So, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. So and tell me, because this could be what other kids or other people. So since I've had a few traumatic experiences,
Mm-hmm.
when I see other people going through trauma, it affects me like more than before. So I don't know what that is.
In my field, we have names for everything. What it is you being a real person and having empathy and having been deeply wounded yourself. You feel that in others. We call it secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. I talk to social workers a lot about it and doctors as well because if you are a caring, empathetic human being, another person's pain is a very disturbing thing to witness.
Yes.
So it is very common in my field, but you see it also with like EMTs, hospital workers, people during the pandemic watching people get sick and die. Um, how it was hurtful for them. If we truly feel and risk being human, we're going to risk having these feelings. We can definitely talk about healing from trauma because trauma can be healed. It's not the way we're going to have to be forever.
Yeah. So let's a little bit get back to the topic because like I said, it is very important. I think that it's very important for people to understand that these decisions like have real world effects
Yeah.
on people. Like I've always wondered, is there a study or is there some sort of information on the psychological effects or trauma of a person knowing their skin color makes them a target?
Yes.
Do you understand? It's inescapable.
Right.
Like this here, I can't escape this, and this is what's I'm getting these things
Right.
happening to me because of that. Like that has to have a traumatic.
It does.
And what
They've measured it.
can you speak to that?
Yeah, there's a good amount of research out there that's been going on, especially in the past decade, but beyond that as well, showing that especially Black Americans. Remember, and I don't like to just say African American because the person could be Caribbean American.
Right. I absolutely get that. Right. Yes.
But that Black Americans have a unique experience with racism in our society. Not that other groups don't. There is anti-Semitism. There's people who are anti-Latinx, Latino, all of that. But the trauma that it is acknowledged as racial trauma, it is something that has been measured and that exists. And it could profoundly affect the way we see ourselves in relation to the society. It can affect our ability to do all the things that we'd be able to do if we were respected and allowed to live to our greatest capacity. So what racial trauma can do is it can make things like depression more likely. It can make things like anxiety more likely. It can increase the risk for things like drug addiction or mental illness. And I'm really want to emphasize, this doesn't mean you're broken.
Right.
See, you're not the problem. Nothing wrong with your skin. There's nothing wrong with melanin. The problem is with racism. That's the disease. That's the sickness. And being treated poorly because of a phenotype, the way your genes expressed. Here's your skin color, right? Can be debilitating. And that's what supremacy depends on. So we do have to acknowledge racial trauma. Absolutely. And my field, in when I say my field, it's not just social work, it's also psychology and psychiatry and medicine to some extent now, must acknowledge that this exists and it causes pain, disease, and suffering. And the more trauma you have in life, the more not only are you likely to have things like depression or anxiety or addiction, the more likely you are to get sick. And from the 10 most preventable causes of disease and death in the United States, because they're all stress related, whether it's ischemic heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, even things like fibromyalgia. All of these things have their roots in our response to the social environment. But the thing I want people to know is it's not a done deal. You can heal. And the first way to heal is loving human connection with people who are able to identify and help you name the problem. You're not defective. The society is. The system is, excuse me. And the next part of it is loving connection can help heal in community. So when I see frustrated kids, look, the Black Lives Matter rallies that I attended in the city, these marches were led by like 15 and 16 and 17-year-old kids. And they took their hurt and their pain and their suffering and channeled it into activism. And that to me is one of the most therapeutic acts a person can do. And so there is healing in community. The psychological establishment needs to recognize it. And what do now? They medicate it. Right now, look, I know medicine can be helpful, but to take a youth who's angry and not talk about why they're feeling rageful and just give them a pill to control their anger and their behavior, that actually preserves the system that's causing the problem in the first place.
I still don't feel like the United States really takes mental health seriously. I mean, just look at how insurance is covered mental health. Like,
it's horrible.
It's terrible. And I think most insurances, or this is just my personal belief, I think most insurances have a terrible mental health because they know if they had it, more people would use it. I think mental health would be like some of the most used insurance if it existed. If people could afford it, that would be something that everybody needs. Whereas maybe medical insurance, not everybody uses all the time. But
they're only, and I've seen your tweets, so I know we agree on this. They're only making money by denying care to us.
Right.
But here's a question that I want to ask.
Right.
Why are so many of us sick? Why are so many of us at some point of our lives able to be diagnosed with a serious mental illness like depression, like anxiety, like bipolar disorder? Is this our natural state? Is it possible that the human species evolved for over 200,000 years? And of course, we evolved as hominids for many, many, years before that. Is it possible that a species survived this long? And again, we're not the fastest. We're not the strongest. How did we do it? Is it possible if we're genetically prone to all this mental illness? Is that natural? Or is something going on in our society? Is something going on? Okay, so...
And we're just being medicated. Like, it's the issue is not being addressed. It's you medicate the depression, you medicate the anxiety. Instead of fixing the economic issue, you just give police, you send police and have police patrols just occupy cities. Like, they're not addressing the issue. They're just trying to mask it down,
And they're creating more, but you're bringing up policing. Over policing creates more stress in communities. I don't know what it's like to be a 14-year-old young man walking to school and being afraid of getting stopped from the police. I've talked to my friends who grew up in like Jackson Heights, Queens, and one friend talked about like, hey, we would be like on the way home from school, and my buddies and I, maybe we'd have a basketball and we'd shoot a few hoops, and then we would just go on our way, like having a good afternoon. I was 15, and then the cops would come, and he said, we learned to put our hands up and spread our legs against the walls because we knew it would make it go quicker and easier. And I thought,
having that understanding at that age, that person is expected to go to school and get an A, though.
And that's the thing.
You see the craziness in that? You see the ridiculous in that?
Yeah. And so then you hear people, and by the way, it's not just the Republicans who say this. I've heard Barack Obama talk about it. I've heard other Democrats talk about it. You just got to try harder in school. It's like, if there's drive-by shootings going on, How am I going to concentrate on biology or global studies? Right? You know what I want to get an A in? If that's my life, survival.
Right.
So, one of the things that's important to understand is it's not just these sick things in society, racism and poverty and all of that, and lack of hope and opportunity. It's the social disconnection we're feeling. We humans evolved as pack animals. We are pack animals. We evolved as a group, not as individuals, not in little nuclear families. That's not how humans survived for hundreds of thousands of years. The only way we did it was being in packs and groups. That's how we survived. It's in our DNA. And now we live in a society that separates everybody, pits people against each other, makes them feel disconnected from the world, disconnected from nature, from the beauty that we should all be experiencing right now. Because this world can be a beautiful place, but many people don't see it that way because we've been separated. And I can tell you, there are amazing stories from all over the world. One was a guy in a part of Asia, and he was depressed, and everybody was worried about him. He lost weight. He started to age. He didn't look good. He was an adult man, and he kind of just became like a little catatonic, and so there were researchers from United States and Europe looking at how mental health was being dealt with in other parts of the world. So they said to the doctors, well, what did you do for this man? How did you treat him? Because they said they treated his depression and it went away. And they said the community got together and pulled their resources together and bought him a cow. And they said, excuse me? And they said the community bought him a cow. So now he had this cow to take care of, and that, could give milk and could help do some, plow fields or whatever. And he had purpose and connection. And he had a reason to get up in the morning. And guess what? Depression went away. And so it wasn't just the cow. It was that the community banded together and that they cared and loved him enough to give him something that gave his life a feeling of having more purpose. And what they didn't do was give him a pill, because here's the problem with medicine. It stops working after a while. Eventually you may go off of it, but it doesn't solve the problem. Now, There are people who are on medicine where it does help them, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
And the problem is we are disconnected. What do we do to people who get caught up in our racist criminal injustice system, as I like to call it? Do we connect them with community so that they could heal and feel like they're a part of things? No, we isolate them. We send them away. Like, I live in New York. Where do we send them? Upstate. So their families can't even visit them. So now they're completely cut off. Well, guess what? Who would rob a liquor store? Somebody who feels connected to their community from a place of love? No, somebody who feels disconnected. So our solution is to disconnect them even further. See, that's all backwards. So our whole system is designed to increase isolation.
What does this trauma do? What does this trauma and stress, like, how does it manifest itself? In other words, like what could it look like if a person who's watching this is saying, like, they're having these stresses that we're describing, working, 50 hours and being barely able to make rent, and your kid's birthday's coming up and really can't afford the things that you want to get for your kids. That's another thing that we don't talk enough about, is how parents in poverty, how they're made to feel like they're not good parents because they can't afford the things.
Yeah. We live in a society where it's all about status.
Right.
You see it all around you. It's not like, oh, the rich kids are over there. We don't know what they have. We know
exactly.
And so
how does that trauma though affect? How does it manifest itself in a person?
It can make us sick. It can give us ulcers. It can make it hard for us to sleep. Again, when that fight or flight system's going off, your body's getting ready to do something. So it's hard to rest. It can make it hard to digest and absorb minerals. So we're not getting the best value out of our food. We're more likely to eat things that make us feel good in the short run, but aren't healthy for us in the long run. If you could eat,
and people, these things you just described, stress, these things,
we blame them.
People they may not know,
right?
They may not connect. I'm having, whatever the condition that you mentioned, but they're not connecting it to the stress of, not being paid a living wage.
Trick.
You get what I'm saying?
That's the big trick we play on people. Okay. Oh, and smoking or vaping.
Right.
Or drinking a little more alcohol than might be healthy. Or doing other types of drugs. So what we do is, and this is why I push back on my field, because my field has done damage, and I mean the field of psychology overall and psychiatry have done damage. And the field of psychiatry has propped up the capitalist system, which is oppressive and causes the very illnesses it supposedly is trying to cure by blaming the individual. And so there's two ways of doing it. There's the conservative way of blaming the individual, which is like, you're weak. You don't have willpower. Maybe you need a little extra Jesus and you'll feel better, right? No offense. I heard he was a very nice guy. But the point is, and then the liberal way, oh, that's so enlightened. They go, oh, no. It's not their willpower. It's their genes. They're just defective. And that's not how genes work. Nobody is born defective like that. We know science is showing that our genes literally change based on our physical and social environments. And if you're under all that stress, it literally changes the way your genes are expressing. So it can make you sick. And then there's that feeling of general malaise where you just feel like, I can't sleep. I'm walking through life like a zombie. I don't have adequate social connection.
Like people with sleep apnea, like they may not connect that. Like, hey, I'm just a person. It's heredity. I can't sleep well. You know what I mean? Like it's not a connection to, no, it's because you're having stresses. It's because of this oppression. It's because of untreated trauma or untreated stress.
What is trauma? Is it something that comes out of you that you're born with, or is it something inflicted upon you? Trauma is a wound it's a response. It's a wound from an injury from the outside world, and usually a person or a group of people inflicted on you. But here's the point. If I convince you all your problems are in here, you're mentally deficient, your brain has an issue, it's organic, then I take society off the hook. And Louis Menand, very talented writer, in the New Yorker said, blame it all on the genes. The way of looking at things that describes what's wrong without challenging what's wrong. In other words, why should he goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, why should anybody be unhappy or depressed or anxious when they're living in the freest, most prosperous nation on earth? It must be a flaw in the wiring somewhere. It can't be the system, because then we don't have to challenge the system. Right. So part of my teaching, when I teach my classes of social workers, up and coming social workers, and when I do trainings for the greater professional community, is to say, we need to push back against the medical model. The medical model says there's something wrong with you. And I say what we're calling mental illness is really community illness.
Right. So I think we're gonna have to say that again, because that was eye-opening. The last few words is what connected me to get what you were saying. So can you say all of that one more time, just so we can get it? Because I think it's a very, very important point.
Yeah, to blame it all on the genes is to let society off the hook. It tells the individual that they're the source of their illness, disease, and problems. And and my teaching is based on pushing back against that medical model, which says you're defective and you have a mental illness, or you need to learn to eat better. That's why you're sick. and replacing the idea of what we call mental illness in the individual with the idea of community illness. And how do we heal this mental illness, which is a symptom of the community being unwell?
Right.
The only way we can heal it is through community.
In other words, are these conditions being born out of the conditions we're living in?
I believe they are.
Right. Or like I said the same, I use the same word to mean two different things, but you got what I mean. But let me say it a different way. Like, are these illnesses, these mental illnesses, being born out of the conditions that we're living in? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I believe the conditions we're living in cause and perpetuate what we call mental illness.
Okay, that's a better way of saying it. Yes.
And I think what's behind it, it's not just the economic system of capitalism, but that's at the crux of it, that a capitalist system which focuses on individuals makes us sick and puts us in a state of stress. I'll give you an example. There's an amazing study called Rat Park. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Interesting study. So years ago, they did these experiments with rats. They were trying to understand drug addiction. Like, why would somebody take a drug like cocaine, get addicted, and ruin their life? Who would do that, right? So they said, is it natural to be addicted to these substances? They would take a rat and put a rat in a cage. And they would have sugar water, and then they would have a sugar water bottle that had cocaine in it or other drugs. And the rat preferred 9 times out of 10 the cocaine water, would drink it to the point where they wouldn't eat and they wouldn't sleep. They would become addicted, and many of them overdosed and died. So the scientists said, aha, see, you put a rat in a cage and give them the opportunity to do drugs, they're going to be exposed to it, they'll just do it. So we've got to cut the availability of drugs down because people like rats are just going to do them and do them and do them. And then a bunch of scientists said, this experiment is flawed. And do you know why they saw that it was flawed? Because rats, like humans, are pack animals. And when you socially isolate them in a cage with nothing to do and no other rats to hang out with or relate to, they become toxically stressed. And they will do the drug every time. So to prove their point, they built something called Rat Park. They built this big type of thing that they called a rat park, and it was still a big cage. But instead of having like just, one rat all isolated, they had a bunch of rats. So they could play with the colored balls and they could run on the little wheels because they like to run on the little wheels, and they could cuddle together. They could even have rat sex and make rat babies. Bet you didn't think we were going to talk about rat sex today, right? But I'm full of surprises. And so
Yes.
the thing, and they could huddle together at night, and they did. And then at the end of Rat Park was a little sugar water bottle that had either the opioids or the cocaine in it. Many tried it once. Very few tried it more than once. None of them became addicted, and none of them overdosed and died. And Johann Hari, who writes a lot about addiction and mental illness, Hari, he's got some great TED Talks out there. Johann Hari said, it's not the drug, it's your cage. You see, and what kind of cages have we put people in, metaphorical and literal? What have we done? We've walled each other off from ourselves. We pit community member against community member. We take working class white people and put them in blue uniforms to police working class black and brown people. We pit people against each other, and all the while that we do that, that's making us sick. And you know who knows that? But you know who's got class solidarity? The really rich. They stick together no matter what. And they know the deal. They know they're doing this. I believe they know they're making us sick. And by the way, the average...
It's funny you say that. That's actually one of my questions is, do you believe they know what's happening, the effects of what they're doing?
Okay, so here's where we get into a really interesting part of it. And this is why I feel like we're so on like the same wavelength. Just like, yeah, and it's this. I did an interesting study with people who've won Academy Awards, the Oscar. So how many Academy Awards have we had? 75, 80? I don't know. It's been going on for like a little less than 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then every year there's the best actor. They call best actress, so, leading role, all that stuff. Where they nominate like 4 or 5 people and one person wins. They found that if you won an Academy Award, you lived an average of 4 years longer than people who came in second or third. Winning can actually add years to your life. So here's the secret. And this isn't conspiracy stuff. This is science. That the people who are owning this place and running this place don't want us to know is that the conditions they put us in make it more likely we're going to have a heart attack when we're 60 years old. But the conditions that we are in to preserve their position, they live longer, they're healthier. Hey, Mitt Romney is worth $250 million. He lost the presidency. I'm sure he was disappointed for a little while, right? He wanted to be president. He didn't get it. Do you think he was sick about it? Do you think it took one day off of his life and stress? This man's resting heart rate is like 54, right? Why do you think these people live so long? Because they don't have the level of daily stress that we have. And they're not dumb. See, to them, and this is the thing where I get spiritual, if it's okay, they believe that their value in winning is only valuable if it can be contrasted with our losing, right? And what we know is that's a lie. The earth, the universe is an abundant place. We could all be well. We could all share in it. But see, if we did that, they wouldn't be special. They wouldn't be on top. That's where they get their power from. And they tried to hide this fact. They try to hide this fact from us. They will blame everybody, and it's always blaming this one, blaming that one, blaming the media. Trump would be like, it's the fake news and it's the Mexicans and, but the Democrats do the same thing. They hate the Russians and it's Chinese and it's those darn socialists on Fred Hampton leftists. That's
exactly
why the Turner lost. What? Listen. They don't want us to know the truth. The truth is our power is far greater than theirs. We just don't know it yet.
Mm-hmm. What I like to describe this same situation about people not really understanding their power. It's like, I don't know where I got this story. Maybe when I tell it, maybe you know this story, but it's the story of a baby elephant in a circus who's tied up and can't get free. And the elephant is tied up for years and years and years, and it grows full. So it's tons, and doesn't understand that all it has to do is snap this little rope, because he's been conditioned to think that he cannot, because it's been over time. He wasn't able to do it in the beginning, but he's grown stronger and stronger in his power, but he doesn't know that. And that's what I feel the state of Americans are.
And isn't that part of our jobs? Isn't that part of what you're doing?
That is part of what we're doing, is to educate and to make people understand that what your issues is not you.
Yes. We are not.
This individual responsibility is a joke. It's something that capitalists want us to believe. It's not. But go ahead. Can you speak to that? You were going to say something.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I was listening to Brother Cornel West the other night.
Yes.
And his amazing interview. I think he talks about that, the power that we have. He does it way more eloquently than I do. Mm. But that idea that we have that power, and look at our greatest leaders. Isn't it interesting that our greatest leaders were the ones who tried to remind us of this fact? Mm-hmm. What did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. try to remind us? That it was in numbers. He said, we go farther faster when we go together. What did Brother Malcolm X try to let us know? That it was in unity and numbers that we could change an entire system and an entire world. And you look at, the religious figures throughout history. If you're Christian, the story of Jesus, that was the whole idea of being in community. That idea has spanned many different cultures, and it is the most dangerous idea to whatever the ruling powers that be in any given society are, which is that we are strong together, that we are in a position. I mean, that's the Percy Shelley poem, we are many, ye are few.
Yes, I know.
Right? And, that rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable numbers. What has always changed the world is people coming together, right? So, and this is the lie that the liberal Democrats, which only represent the top 20% of wage earners when it comes to policies, right? The top 20% of wage earners are doing pretty good right now. They've got their health care. They're not going to be evicted. They're happy. They're thinking about when they can go on vacation as soon as the Delta variant goes away, blah, blah, blah. All right. What does the Democratic Party and this liberal elite that runs the media try to tell us? That you're going to only get something by electing people. And gee, I'm sorry, you can't elect the people you like. You'll have to settle for the ones we give you. And I'm sorry, when they get in office, they can't do everything they promised. But, just wait, because we're better than the other guys. And what they don't want us to realize is voting is not in the Bill of Rights. Do you know what the First Amendment is in the Bill of Rights? Of course you do. To the right of the people to peaceably assemble, to petition our government. Free speech and protest is our first right. Voting is not in there, right? It's in other parts of the Constitution, but not in the Bill of Rights.
Right.
Those people who created this, listen. There were slave owners. There were some terrible people.
There were bad people, but I mean, bad people doesn't mean they have all their ideas are bad. That's not what that means.
All their ideas are bad,
right.
Like if I ever find out that the person who invented chocolate ice cream was like a Nazi or something, it will make me upset.
Right.
But I'll still eat
you'll still eat chocolate.
And he's dead. Anyway, but the point is, they want us to think it's got to be the electoral politics that changes things. And we know this. That has never changed anything. Mm-hmm. Why did child labor laws get passed at the turn of the last century? Because people protested. Why did women get the right to vote? Because they literally tied themselves to the White House fence and wouldn't take no for an answer from Woodrow Wilson. Why did black people have the Voting Rights Act passed? Because Martin Luther King Jr. did not listen to Lyndon Johnson, did not go away. Lyndon Johnson was an incrementalist, and he said, wait, this isn't good to do now. And King was like, not having it. And guess what? Those numbers turned out. And the Voting Rights Act was passed. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed because people blocked traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge for hours. That happened. And we're told now to wait. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the architects of mass incarceration, and a woman who, when she was DA, bragged about putting poor people in jail and laughed about it. Those people are going to save us? No, we're going to, we did the Medicare for All rallies, right? And we were told, oh, this is divisive. I said, what's divisive? 70,000 people a year dying pre-pandemic because they didn't have health care. We're not going to get that from politicians. We're going to get it by being in the streets. And the other piece is, it's not just about the political movement. It's also about that human connection that we have. What you just did, thinking about children in Palestine who you may never meet and having a visceral reaction, an emotional reaction, that's the kind of community that heals and changes the world, Jay.
Absolutely. And the point I wanted to bring up next, that was kind of jarring. That's why I had to kind of just, what you were saying, describing is absolutely the world I want to live in. Um, but let's talk about. I was going to ask this other question, but let's talk about kids that are in such conditions as the Palestinian kids. Like how, you know what I mean? Like I saw an article where, there's rubbish, all this, from a bomb, and a kid is playing soccer around that. And it is just so shocking to me what people can do to other people.
Yeah.
Or let me say it a different way, because America likes to say they didn't do anything. What's shocking to me is what people allow other people to do to other people.
It's being done in our name.
Exactly, and that's the point, because we're not doing it. Yeah, okay. Let me rephrase that so I can make it a little more clearer. And
you can still go to jail for murder if you pay somebody to shoot someone. You're still a murderer, and we're doing that.
Right, and exactly, and that's a great analogy. So my thing is, even with the Palestinian-Israeli situation, let's say America is on the side of Palestine. I mean, on the side of Israel.
Oh yeah.
But you should have the humanity to say, "Hey, Israel, okay, I get the conflict, but you can't be like, if kids is dying over here, like this can't, like we don't have the humanity to even say, hey, there needs to be something where we're not killing kids and you know what I mean? Like what I'm basically saying, war and all of this conflict is bad, and that should end, period. That's what should end. But I'm saying, if America is like they don't even say, hey, stop kids. They just go, America, they have to defend themselves. That's their reaction to that.
Israel has nuclear weapons.
Right.
They're the only nuclear power in that part of the world. So what are they afraid of? Their armies, Air Force, ballistics capability is way above the countries that they're fighting with, and definitely of the people of Palestine and Gaza. So this isn't about let's get the idea of it being a Jewish state right out of the conversation. It is a nation state. Okay? There are people of all faiths live there, and people of no faith live there. That's just cover. You want to know, why does the United States government say they care about human rights and then fund Israel as they commit genocide in Gaza? Ilhan Omar talked about it, and she was made to apologize. AIPAC pays off members of both parties in Congress.
She was made to apologize.
Billions of dollars a year. She made a comment that people said was anti-Semitic. She was talking about the lobbying money, which pays off these representatives. That's how is it that there are so many millionaires in Congress, and they're not particularly intelligent people? Like,
right,
like smarter than most people I've seen who were representatives in Congress or the Senate. And seriously, right. Fred-Hampton leftist knows more about history than Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi. Right. Good morning.
I call them low-skilled workers. That's what I call Congress people. They're the low-skilled workers. Everybody else is not.
They're lazy. They don't show up for work. You don't have to show up. What other job? Do you get paid $174,000 a year and you don't even have to show up? You don't have to vote? So they get paid off. But what did Ilhan Omar say? So she said a comment that is very common. By the way, if people are familiar, it's not even just in hip hop culture anymore. Like it's out there in pop culture. The phrase, "It's all about the Benjamins." Right. There's a song, and then there's a whole bunch of others that kind of took that and looped it. This is not something that people who know pop culture and music culture are very familiar with.
Right.
And it's not an anti-Semitic.
No.
But what happened is she said it. She was basically saying it's about the cash flow. AIPAC is a lobbying group. They're paying people off because they want them to vote their way, and that's what happens. And they were like, ooh, it's anti-Semitic, because they're constantly, look, I'm not a big fan of like the squad's inaction on things, but it is unacceptable the way Ilhan Omar especially has been treated.
Right.
And the way that Nancy Pelosi, I think, diminishes these women, especially Ilhan. She's done it and has contempt for her. It's kind of gross. But that said, lobbying money from the Israeli government makes its way through groups like AIPAC. Like any, everyone's worried about, the Democrats were whining about Russian influence in the last election. Well, and also the one in 2016, really, they were upset about. When they looked at it, like I looked at the reports, like Russia spent thousands of dollars on like Facebook ads. First of all, just letting you know, Russia, we're not really looking at Facebook ads.
Right.
We're not even on Facebook much, but fine, waste your money. I don't care. I think I don't have a lot of love for those oligarchs either.
Right.
Any oligarch. And I think Putin's an oligarch,
I think we can safely call him an oligarch.
Steals from his people. But that's not the point. The point is, Israel does far worse when it comes to buying off politicians. And I get it. It's in their own self-interest. But don't lie to me, and I'm talking to our own government now, and say you believe in human rights when you're supporting Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabists who run Saudi Arabia, who are murderers. They still behead and crucify people in Saudi Arabia every year.
And everybody knows it. Like it's everybody knows it. Right. It's not a secret.
I thought we stopped crucifying people 2,000 years ago. Call me crazy. And they're like, Israel's perpetrating genocide in Gaza. Saudi Arabia is perpetrating genocide in Yemen.
Like, what are the conditions in those kids?
Who did it?
Think about those kids in Yemen.
And who started that? Joe Biden and Barack Obama. John Kerry was the Secretary of State at that point, I think, right?
Yes.
Or no?
No, it could have been Hillary. It might have been Hillary by that time. It might have been Hillary by that time.
But either way, didn't matter. Biden and Obama ended up giving the green light to Saudi Arabia to perpetrate genocide in Yemen. So, like, now you get a new guy in, Trump, who comes in and goes, oh, I'm going to drain the swamp. And what does he do? He bows to the Saudi princes too. Why? Why are we, and let's not even get into the point that 14 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. And we're not even, right now, until Congress changes it, we're not even allowed the families, and I know 2 families that lost people in the towers on 9/11, right? I'm in New York. Mm-hmm. They're not even allowed to sue Saudi Arabia for their connection to 9/11. So what is this? Who does our government work for? It ain't us.
And it feels like everything we've described, all the conditions, all the terrible things that's going on in the United States, what it feels like is that people, if you look at all this stuff individually, you won't understand how corrupt and all these problems. Like, you have to look at everything together, and it just feels like I'm not sure if Americans do that, and it's certainly when we're talking about capitalism, sort of the main topic. Like, certainly when we're talking about capitalism, like, are people connecting the conditions of capitalism to the stress and the trauma that they have?
No, they're not allowed. They're being told a lie.
So what do you mean by that when you say
they're being told a lie? So if you're stressed out, that's your fault. If you're sick, you made bad food choices or you got bad genes. If you're depressed or anxious or addicted to something, that's probably genetic. And we're going to give you a pill for that. We're going to make more money off of it. We're going to let you know you're defective. And we're never going to challenge the system. So then when we talk about issues of poverty and homelessness and lack of health care, it's like playing that game whack-a-mole, right? where there's what you hit one and then the other one pops up, instead of pulling the whole board off and seeing it's all one thing and it's all connected. You know, it's like, that's what we talk about living in the matrix, right? And I'm not talking about whether we're in a virtual simulation.
No, that's not at all. Just the matrix in the sense of the system.
That blows
that's what
my
we're
mind.
saying.
I can't go there because
right. That's not what we're talking about.
Whether someone's in one of those or not, it's like they're fucking homeless. So like, you know, let's fix it. But the thing is, that matrix is that idea that like all these problems are just a coincidence.
Right.
Once we take the right colored pill, right? And we start looking in and realize like, oh, there are people with different ways of looking at the world, you know, and it was Marx and it was Lenin and it was Che Guevara and it was those people. But there are people writing today. There's Professor Richard Wolff who talks about it. There's, I think, Cornel West is another one who talks about it, but he comes more from a spiritual place of understanding the connectedness of it. And it's incredible. All of a sudden, everything starts to make sense. It's like that movie from years ago with Bruce Willis, The Sixth Sense. You know, I'm guessing many people have seen it or they're just never going to see it. But the point is, at some point, spoiler alert, he realizes he's dead. Toward the end of the movie, he's like, he's actually the ghost. And he was like, oh shit, I'm a ghost. And then everything started making sense. And it's like, Malcolm X said the thing that separates oppressed people in the United States from oppressed people in the rest of the world is in the rest of the world, they know when they're oppressed. And we don't. We've been led to believe we're the freest and most prosperous nation on earth.
Right. Like every issue you have is your decision making. Every issue you have is your problem.
Yeah.
Like my question to a person who says that is that, do you really believe that the kids who enter into Compton High School, which is not too far from here, do you really believe they have a chance of making it out as the same as the people who enter Beverly Hills High School? Like, is that a real belief from you?
And by the way, let me tell you, the kids who enter Compton High School are way smarter than those kids in Beverly Hills. See, those kids in Beverly Hills don't ever have to learn how to survive. And I'm not saying they don't have pain in their lives. I mean,
no, not at all. That's not what we're talking about.
You could be born with you know, wealth privilege and still, you know, be a victim of LGBTQ plus bias, or still a victim of sexual assault, of course, regardless of income. But I always, you know, I teach my social work students and the professionals I teach, like, so when somebody comes to you for help and they're like addicted to crack or heroin and they've been homeless for years, don't call them an addict, call them a survivor. Because I'll tell you this, I wouldn't last one day out there. I wouldn't know how to have the skills and the thought and the cleverness and the understanding on how to survive. But what the point is, let
me tell this story. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to lose thought, but so, you know, I'm from Compton. My wife is from Orange County. She's Black. And you don't know how many times I've been out with her at night and we're walking from a movie theater to the parking lot or something. And it's just a normal reaction that something is happening here. And I'm just noticing. She's like, why are you looking over there? Because you didn't see that. And she, you know what I mean? Like it's a different upbringing.
Well,
it's a different upbringing that she has where those things certain things don't key her attention. That to me, it's obvious. She thinks I'm real, like, suspicious, and it's no, like, no, I'm trying to stay safe. Like, that's, you know,
no,
I'm
your
trying
brain
to make sure.
has been trained.
Right.
Notice those things. Think about soldiers coming back from war, you know, like, especially in the Middle East, where, you know, if you were in Fallujah or one of those cities where there could be snipers 360 degrees around you, and any noise or movement meant you could be injured or killed, or your buddy could be injured or killed. You learned to be hyper vigilant. So we know this. Science has proven it. So take that person out of Iraq and put them into, you know, Jersey City, and they're going to be walking around, and any sudden movement, their brain has been trained to do that, and it's a survival. See, there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain learned to survive.
Right.
Now that can heal. So, we'll talk about that healing. So there's a whole bunch of work being done with mindfulness and meditation and yoga done in groups and community actually is very healing. And some people do use medication to kind of amp that stress response system, but the longer lasting things are when we're able to do that work on ourselves, our bodies, minds, and souls in community. But the point is to be like, well, why did Freddie Gray run? Why did he run from the cop? If only he had cooperated. Well, let me tell you, if you grew up in a neighborhood where police could arrest you for no reason, plant drugs on you, which they do, beat you up or kill you, and you have maybe a little bit of weed in your pocket, you're going to get the hell out of there. You're not thinking, you're running because that's your survival instinct. And then the cop goes, oh, he ran. Must be committing a crime. And that is the recipe for disaster. So the society inflicts PTSD upon people and then punishes them when they exhibit the PTSD symptoms. And then if you say you're upset about it and it causes you to be depressed or anxious, they're like, well, take a pill. We'll give you this pill so you can feel better about it. But we're never going to talk about why. Why in a summer of rebellion against a racist criminal justice system did we nominate the architect of the crime bill of 1994, who then proceeded to give $750 million more to police than Donald Trump had pledged to give, after a summer of a uprising, a popular uprising against racism? How is that possible? So of course people feel defeated because we just traded one racist for another. But don't worry, because honestly,
because he's a Democrat. That's what they tell us. Well, he's different because he's a Democrat. But let me ask you this, because something jumped out at me. It's funny how this is the second time in this conversation you say something in the very next question I was going to ask you, and that was PTSD. Can you give me a better understanding? I'm not quite sure I have a complete understanding. Can you just tell me what PTSD, or our audience, can you kind of describe what that is? And I know it's getting late. We're coming to an end, but I want to get this particular question before we're done. So can you describe, PTSD and what it is? And
what it stands for is post-traumatic stress disorder. And anytime we are traumatized, and we may end up with PTSD. Not everybody who experiences a trauma ends up with PTSD. It's when our abilities to cope are overwhelmed by actual events that are happening or have happened in our lives, our ability to cope. So an example would be somebody who is a victim of rape or sexual assault of some sort, and whose coping mechanisms aren't able to overcome the horrible violence that was inflicted upon them. And PTSD is a symptomology that can last for months or years or decades. It is treatable. And that symptomology can manifest in many ways, because what's happening is that stress response, as I mentioned, keeps getting triggered. People can have flashbacks. And what can happen is you may not be able to sleep. You may start becoming afraid of things you were normally able to do before. So, we saw the first responders who went down on 9/11 to dig bodies out of the rubble. It was horrible. And they did it every day without a break for months and months and months. And I've talked to some of these guys, and my friend worked with them, and they said, like, literally, they were fine during it. But after it all blew over, they had PTSD. And what happened? He'd be on his way to work and he couldn't breathe. And he'd go to the hospital with chest pains, thinking he was having a heart attack, but it was a massive panic attack. So what he started to do was drink alcohol while going to work, secretly, of course.
Right, of course, yeah.
Smoke a little weed or take a pill. The PTSD symptoms can be very terrifying. And one of the things that I'll mention, and we can always come back to this if you ever want to talk again, is that we hold trauma and stress not just in our brains, but in our bodies. This is something that can feel terrifying for a survivor of trauma. And that is these bodily sensations that feel frightening, like their body is rebelling against them. And it could be tightness in the chest, the feeling like your throat's closing, like you can't breathe, like you can't see. Your heart is pounding. You think you're going to die. You're going to have a stroke or an aneurysm and all of that. And what's happening is the body is literally remembering what's happened, the PTSD. So if you were tackled and beat up by a police officer walking down the street of Baltimore or Compton, right, where you're from, you don't ever have to be tackled by them again to have that feeling. It's locked away in your body because it was traumatic. And one day you could just be walking down the street, see a policeman on the same street corner that you did 10 years ago when this happened, and it's not happening now. But guess what? It's happening in your brain. And those memories, those traumatic memories, are often stored not as thoughts. And that's the problem. People don't identify and say, oh, I'm having a traumatic episode. Like with therapy, they can learn it. I'm having a PTSD episode. What they often come out as I said, are physical sensations and sensory things. So we respond to like colors or smells or temperatures or sounds that could trigger it. For instance, a victim of rape might not remember too much detail about the incident, but the next time she smells somebody wearing the cologne that her attacker wore, then that victim might be triggered into a PTSD response. It makes people feel like they're going crazy. What's wrong with me? I'm going crazy. I can't drive to work anymore. I can't do this anymore. I can't.
Can you keep getting can you get PTSD on top of PTSD? Like, do you have to, like, once you have PTSD, is it a like, do you have it, or can something else just on top?
What you're
you get layers
about,
and layers and layers and layers. Can that happen?
Yeah, what you're talking about is what the psychiatric community doesn't want to talk about, which is complex trauma. They're still not good at it. Let me tell you, the psychiatric community is way. I mean, there were some great psychiatrists out there talking about it, but complex trauma is exactly what you're talking about. And what it is, it's an intersectional view of trauma. There's a big difference between somebody who has PTSD because they were in a tragic car accident. Maybe they lost their ability to walk. That could cause trauma. You could have PTSD from that. And it's a horrible, horrible thing that affects you the rest of your life. But it's a hell of a lot different than growing up and having trauma because of racism, because of poverty, because of maybe you had violence in the home. Maybe you were raped by somebody in your church or, faith organization. Maybe you were beat up by the police. Maybe you end up incarcerated and there's a whole bunch of abuse that goes on there. So what you talk about is complex trauma, or maybe you grew up with physical and emotional abuse at home, and then you became sexually abused and physically abused in relationships in your teens and 20s. Now you've got complex trauma, and it's cumulative. So that's the part where Western medicine breaks down. Doesn't really work that well in treating complex trauma. What does is...
Have they not figured out how to monetize it? Is that what the issue is?
Well, yeah, it doesn't fit their MO, which is that there's something wrong with you and you're defective. Complex trauma acknowledges that the world is
something else is going on. Yeah.
And so, but there are a lot of people in my field treating complex trauma now and learning. And I do a lot of training of practitioners in it. But also the recognition that going back to what we started talking about in the beginning, the world affects us. It can affect us down to a cellular level. How do we heal and then protect ourselves from getting beat down again? That only can happen with community. And that's why the people who run this place will do everything they can to stop us from coming
that community. Kind of a secondary question to that is related. Is there such thing as generational trauma? Like, can trauma be passed through?
Yeah.
So if something happened to my dad is a Korea War vet, and he's a medic. So That explains a lot. That's something I learned recently,
Yeah.
and explains a lot for his alcoholism, like what he saw in the war. People having to put people back together, and I'm sure he didn't get treatment for that. So I'm saying, could somebody experience trauma like that, and that trauma be passed down?
Yes, there is generational trauma, and the understanding of how genes work now includes a study of something called epigenetics. And epi means on top of or above genetics. And what it really does is it talks about how the environment affects the expression of our genes. And they've done studies where they know that Holocaust survivors, that trauma and other issues that they dealt with can affect the gene expression 2 generations down. And the same thing for ADOS, American descendants of slaves, right? So slavery. And so what happened is the generational trauma that exists can literally change the way our genes are expressed. And those little codes in the genes on how to read them can be passed down, we think, at least 3 generations.
That's actually what I was getting to. Was it stems from that, like, because the trauma that those people had to have gone through, of you picking in the field, and then your slave owner just takes you into the barn and rapes you, and then you go back to the field picking right next to your husband.
Yep.
Like, that's traumatic. Or you have a child, and the child, you have forced sex with somebody, which they did, so that you can produce a child, and then that child is just taken away from you and sent to another place.
That trauma can
like
last.
That type of trauma, like, you get what I'm saying? That
Absolutely.
existence, the people have to been walking PTSD like every day. It's just trauma that had to have like a connection to their kids, and that's what I was getting to.
Yeah, you're very on target with this, and intuitively you're getting this stuff and knowing this stuff, and and science is providing the answers. So if people are interested in epigenetics, there's a nice little video. If you just punch epigenetics, EPI genetics, into YouTube, a bunch of videos come up with this. One is a video with a guy who looks like me, but with a goatee, and maybe looks like he could be my younger brother. And he's a guy that does these like 15-minute videos on science, kind of like what Bill Nye does, but this guy does, right? A little funky and cool. And he does this thing on epigenetics, and he explains how changes in the social or physical environment literally can shape the way our genes are read. And it doesn't change the gene. You're born with what you're born with. But not all your genes get expressed, and that's a good thing. For instance, you might have the BRCA gene, which is the gene that makes breast cancer and sometimes ovarian cancer is more likely, but not everybody with the BRCA gene gets it. And so here's an interesting example of how the environment works. Gabor Mate, M-A-T-E, a very, very well-regarded guy who talks about addiction and wrote a beautiful book on addiction called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Gabor Mate was interviewed for Zeitgeist Moving Forward. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's really good, filmed by Peter Joseph. And so in it, he gives the example, which I really like, of breast cancer. We know that there's a gene that can cause breast cancer, right? The BRCA gene. Mm-hmm. Angelina Jolie had it, and she decided to get, I think, a radical double mastectomy to prevent her from getting cancer because she didn't want to die. And it was in her family. But here's the thing. If you take 100 women with breast cancer, and Mate talks about this, how many of them do you think you have the gene for breast cancer? 7. Whoops. 7. Only 7 out of 100 women with breast cancer actually have the gene. 93 of them don't have the gene. And not everybody who has the gene ends up getting the cancer. What is the thing? Well, it is the environment. The environment can turn a gene on or off, can control how many times that gene gets duplicated. And if it's the gene for the stress response, it can even happen in the womb while a fetus is developing. If there's a whole bunch of stress and chaos outside and the mom's stress hormone levels go up, the baby's body reads that and changes epigenetically the way its stress response comes out. And yes, that can be passed on generations. We're not sure exactly why or how the epigenetic coding, some gets passed and some doesn't. They're studying it. But I do want to say, I don't just rant about politics. I talk about some of this stuff, and I realize in my little name here, I didn't put my Twitter handle, which is
go ahead.
If
you're able to change it. If not, we can just kind of just shout it out for everybody to follow you. Because you're a great follow. You say you were a fan of mine. I'm a fan of yours because your tweets. I feel like people's tweets. Yours in particular. Like maybe you view mine as fiery, but yours in particular, I find it's fire with information or statistics or like that type of stuff. So that's what I like. He's a great follow. So if you got it there, follow him on Twitter. Absolutely.
Can I say that's why I threaten them? That's why I threaten the liberal establishment, because I work for an establishment they have a lot of respect for. Now I'm here representing my own views, and it's very clear in my Twitter. I'm not
right. I did see that.
The views of Columbia or Adelphi or any place I've ever worked. My own views. But the fact that I work for an establishment that liberals hold up as
right,
the fact that I was a director at 2 rape crisis centers, that's something they normally like.
Right.
But then I stand up and I say the president is a sexual predator, or I say capitalism is killing us. They're like, so they attack me. Like just happened last night. A bunch of people were tied. This one woman was really pushing it that like we have to let Adelphi and Columbia know to fire this guy. Well, listen, the troll farms that are paid for by people affiliated with the Democratic Party tried to get me fired from Columbia and Adelphi last year because I dared stand up and say that I believe Tara Reid, because I believe Tara Reid,
right,
expert in trauma. Right. And I've talked to many survivors. Tara sounds exactly like so many survivors I've spoken to before. And I said it, and they tried to get me fired. And that's directly coming from higher up. That's not an organic thing where people like don't like my tweets. So they're going to oh, okay. Listen,
why is information? What I'm very afraid of right now is the attack on words and thought, the attack on opinion and belief. Like, why do you have to stifle what I'm saying? Even if I said the sky is red, why does that have to be stopped?
I'm sorry.
Like, why does that?
Jay, we now have to ban you from all social media platforms. Unless government, and then you lie. Like Joe Biden the other night on the town hall on COVID actually said if you get the vaccine, you can't get COVID, which is absolutely not true.
That's not true.
Please don't tell people that. Yeah. It just greatly, if you get vaxxed, greatly reduces the likelihood that you will have to be hospitalized, put on a ventilator, or die. And that's a good thing.
Right.
And he said the opposite because he's not a smart man. He's a mediocre, graduated in the bottom of his law school class. He's never been particularly intelligent, smart, or curious. So he says this thing, they tell him, he gets it wrong. So why is he not banned? But why do you get attacked? If you say the sky is red, well, hey, listen, maybe it is. Maybe I'm seeing red wrong.
Right.
Maybe we should listen to Compton Jay.
But the point I'm making is that if free speech is our cornerstone of our government, of our system, why is it right now speech is being labeled misinformation, which is the same thing of it's so crazy how Joe Biden and Donald Trump are similar. It's so crazy. Build back America, make America great again.
Oh God.
Like it's so crazy how similar they are. Now I lost the point that I was making, but
that cancel culture and the attack on anybody who thinks differently.
Yeah, oh yeah, the misinformation. And the other example I was going to say is that his thing, Trump said fake news, information that was true or possibly true that was about him. That's just fake news. He labeled
Right.
it something that's this is not true.
Fake
The same
news.
thing that Joe Biden is doing. Misinformation. Anything like what happened to you. Anything, any critique of him, that's misinformation. Really? That's my opinion. But it's the same
Oh yeah,
thing
and like
that's
I
happening.
said, they're trying to gather people together, try to get me fired from my work, my employment, because they don't like my opinion. These are Democrats. Remember, they're not. We call them blue MAGA for a reason.
Right. They're very authoritarian. They're very like they have liberal policies they claim, but they want to enforce them very authoritarian like, and it's very that's very weird to me.
They like authoritarianism with a rainbow flag. So what does that mean for us? They sell us an identity. And listen, identity is surely important. I can say, although I do not like Barack Obama's neoliberal policies, I understand the historical impact
exactly
that had on young black children growing up and looking at a president and saying he has skin like mine.
Right.
That
has a real effect. We get that.
Identity matters.
Right.
And it can't be the only thing that matters. For instance, if somebody kills you and they are LGBTQ plus and a member of an oppressed minority, it doesn't matter. They still
exactly.
They're still robbing you or killing. So the point is, we distract with identity. We don't have to change the system. We just change the face.
We just change the face with the same message. And it's just disturbing. So we're gonna bring it here. I just realized we're over 145. I think we're gonna because we can literally go for a long time. I feel like our conversation can just keep going.
I'm gonna call you tonight. Let's just chat.
So how about this? I think I've said it to you before. But I kind of want to check in with you about various topics around this periodically. So maybe we could do, some sort of series where we're doing maybe, 5-10 episodes where we're kind of talking about different things surrounding this sort of topic. But yeah, we're gonna have to leave it here. I'm gonna give you a few moments. Is there anything that you're working on or anything you want to shout out before we go ahead and end this episode? Like, is there anything you're working on, meaning like political or even in your work or around trauma, anything coming out, any news you want to bring up to the audience?
Yes. Working on the revolution and
yes.
overthrowing the racist patriarchy. No, I am actively out there. It's nice. It's my summer break. I don't start teaching again until, it's less than a month away, about a month away. So I will be doing some writing. I'm going to get some articles out. I do want people to know that if you follow me on Twitter or other social media, there's a connection between the things that I talk about, whether it's capitalism, poverty, over policing, criminal injustice, and sexual violence. Men who easily drop bombs on poor children around the globe are also men who don't think twice about violating the bodily autonomy of a woman. So I'm a very big advocate for Tara Reid and for, thank God, the victims of Andrew Cuomo were vindicated. And as a survivor myself, it's important that I continue to do that work. Check out my TED Talk, which is Watch the Gap. My last name, Zenkis, Watch the Gap on YouTube. And stay tuned because it's not just me. I'm working with some really wild and amazing folks who are having the conversations we need to have to change this world. You've been sold a bill of goods. You've been told that there's only one way to look at things, and it's not. It's a lie. And, we got to break that lie, but we have to do it. And this is where I go back to Cornel West. We've got to do it with love. And to me, he's a prophet. And I don't use that word lightly. We've got to break that illusion. We've got to do it with love and compassion and relentless compassion and holding people accountable for what they're doing and what they've done and what they continue to try to do in oppressing people. But I'm excited because once you see this stuff, you can't go back.
Yeah,
And
you
a
can't
lot of
unsee
people
it.
are seeing it.
You can't unsee it, and that's one thing for me as a recovering liberal myself. Like 2 years ago, there's no way I thought I would be here with these.
It's amazing.
No, there's no way I thought, I'm the guy who have a Barack Obama shirt, proudly, yeah, I'm just here with Barack Obama. That's basically how I was, taking my kids, voting. We're going to go vote as a family, black family for this black president. Let's go, guys, taking pictures. And just to 2 years later to understand that I was so misinformed, thinking that I was informed,
Well, they
and
lied to you.
yeah,
That's not
they
your
lied
fault.
to me. Yeah, and but I'm glad I'm here now, speaking with people like you. So we're gonna leave it there. It's been a pleasure. I'm gonna call you the professor. Just because I like that, it's a kind of a cool nickname.
All right, I'm liking it too.
So I'm gonna call you the professor, and hopefully we'll have more conversations like this. Thank you for joining me here. I'm gonna end the live stream, but stay on, Professor, for a few minutes after the stream ends. So join us again. I will be on later today with Comrade Misty at 12 my time. So that's 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be talking about everything Julian Assange from the beginning, just giving the whole story for those that may not know. We're going to do that today. So join me later, and I'm going to be signing off right now. Thank you, and join us later for another episode of Straight Out of Politics. Thank you.